the two issues, analysis of which propelled Professor Chaudhuri to contest existing interpretations provided by Professor Shur particularly. He pointed out that Shur had erroneously linked this change of the name of the state with the Nazrana resolutions, wherein it was stated that the appellation Hill Tripura was used by the British in contradistinction to the British district of Tripura. So there are two, Hill Tripura and the British, the Plains Tripura, British Tripura. He clearly states that the Nazrana resolutions were passed only in March 1870. Further, he went on to say that the Nazranas in one form, Nazrana means tribute, Nazranas in one form or another were always paid by the Rajas of Tripura, and the distinction between the two parts of the territories of Tripura was so clear with the century-old tradition behind it that there was hardly any need to re-emphasize this distinction again, and therefore a fresh explanation is required to explain British intentions and motives, why they changed the name of the state or appointed a political agent. Here, Professor Chaudhuri invoked what the famous historian R.C. Majumdar had called the theory of one church, first mooted by Lord Canning, the British Governor General, which implied that India under direct British rule and India under princely rule, so British India and the princely India, constituted in effect one single political unit, and therefore using appellations such as independent Tripura is anathema and anachronism. Similarly, on the issue of the appointment of first political agent, he again differs with previous explanations. According to him, the earlier writers, including Shur also, have no doubt correctly pointed out that Kuki-Lushai disturbances in the eastern frontier of the state, bordering British territory of Assam and Bengal, and the analogous concern of the non-settlement of the boundary dispute between the Tripura state and the British dominions as the major causes that motivated the British to appoint a British political agent to settle these problems once for all. But it was a partial explanation for him. For him, again I quote him, there was a far more important reason. By quoting a letter written by Ashley Eden, the Lieutenant Governor of Bengal, addressed to the Government of India dated 25th May 1870, he highlighted the fact that the whole emphasis of the Bengal government, and this is a quotation I'm doing, whole emphasis of the British government, as is evident from the letter, was on reform and enlightened administration. The Lushai-Kuki question was deliberately relegated into the background. So this is what Dipak Chaudhuri writes. And it was this question of reform and enlightenment which ultimately prompted Lord Mayo to approve of the appointment of a political agent in Tripura as part of his general program of reform and modernization of the princely states of India. However, when he says that, and here I have made a small critique of what he has said. However, when he says that through the appointment of political agents in the native states, the British were trying both to penetrate culturally and to initiate a process of resource development of these states for an industrialized Britain in the late 19th century, and thereby implying princely Tripura as well, it appears at the present stage of our knowledge to be a little far-fetched argument and calls for a relook, at least in the case of Tripura. Because if this was so, that is, if the British were actually interested in modernization, enlightenment, and development of the resources of the princely states such as Tripura, then the British would not have tolerated a resistant and more vocal Birchandra after 1877. And neither would the former, that is the British, dilute the role of the British political agent in Tripura since 1878, which Professor Chaudhuri had pointed out in his own work. So there are issues with his work which also needs further exploration. He has actually shown the way, so it has to be discussed further. The subject of the relation between Indian princess and British paramountcy after 1858 had been studied by several scholars. While some emphasize, as Professor Dipak Chaudhuri does, the purely civilizing mission of the British in dealing with the princely states, or someone like Dr. Shur, who highlighted the security dimension only, others were more circumspect and offered complex argumentation. One such anthropologist historian was Bernard S. Cohn, the famous anthropologist historian. According to Cohn, after 1858, the British articulated, and I quote him, two divergent and even contradictory theories of rule. One which sought to maintain India as a feudal order, and the other looking towards changes which would inevitably lead to the destruction of this feudal order. So these are contradictory trends. If India were ruled in a feudal mode, then an Indian aristocracy had to be recognized and or created, which could play the part of loyal feudatories to their British queen. For Khan, the imperial assemblage at Delhi in 1877, when Queen Victoria was declared Kaiser-e-Hind or Queen of India, in a glamorous event that prominently displayed 63 ruling princes, and in which Birchandra also sent gifts to the queen, represented this feudal mode. So the relation between the imperial authority, the queen, she's at the top, and all the princes, they're like the feudal lords under the queen. This is the pattern Bernard Cohn says. This is one pattern of the evolution of relation between the princely states and the British imperial authority. Lord Lytton characterized the princes as a powerful aristocracy whose complicity could be secured and efficiently utilized by the British in India. As Barbara and Ramusek points out, the Indian princes were to be subordinated to their imperial British suzerain while remaining influential, legitimate, even if despotic rulers vis-a-vis their Indian subjects. So we can see a little bit of historiography of how the various historians have discussed the relation between the princes and the imperial authority, in which Professor Chaudhuri or Dr. Shur, they are also participants. In the light of the above discussion, it becomes clear that considerations of the civilizing mission, security, political strategy, and governance all combined and dictated the appointment of a political agent in Tripura. Even if the outward explanation was modernization, it was in all probability a symbolic gesture, and there were other concerns which need further exploration. In the historiography of modern India, there is a strong current of thought which valorizes British rule in transforming in Indian society, and that includes Marxist historians as well. And it appears Professor Chaudhuri was much influenced by this trend of historiography. But such an approach devalues Indian initiative, or to be more precise, does not take into consideration a complex, multi-layered, give and take, mutual response system involving the colonizers and the colonized. So while we appreciate Chaudhuri's viewpoint, I believe there is at the same time scope to go beyond what I have called a Chaudhurian paradigm. The paradigm which he set for himself and about which I have just discussed gave direction to his further explorations into various aspects of the reign of Birchandra Manikya. Thus, in many essays published in the 1980s and 1990s, he had discussed elaborately with minute details culled from chiefly administrative reports of the political agents, the origins of Agartala municipality, prohibition of sati and slavery, or the introduction of public health services in princely Tripura, etc. So his research on the era of Birchandra Manikya had opened or have given him opportunity to discuss on many issues to work on. One common factor that connected all his essays that he wrote on the period of Birchandra Manikya was his firm belief that the British civilizing mission played a positive role, even if it undermined Birchandra's authority for a short time. He was categorical that after 1877, Birchandra Manikya became more assertive and resistant to imperial intrusions. His magnum opus discusses all these issues in details, and whoever in future will work on these areas cannot simply ignore his works. It is to his credit that in writing local history or regional history, he did not forget the global perspective and tried to maintain a nice balance between the two. This is a lesson every prospective historian of Tripura should emulate from him. Moving on another area that has been covered in his The Political Agents and the Native Raj was an elaborate discussion on the status and functioning of the economy of princely Tripura in the late 19th century. This section of this book was separately translated with additional information by him into Bengali as Tripura Orthonoitik Itihas. His was the first venture to study the economic history of princely Tripura from a historian's perspective. In his introduction to the Bengali volume, he lamented the fact that without adequate sources, his treatment of the economy was extremely sketchy. Except for the annual administrative reports, other sources were virtually absent, but still I would consider it to be an important contribution. At least he initiated the process that can be improved upon in the days to come, which he also hoped. While he otherwise painted a gloomy picture of Hill Tipura's economy, but at the same time, he also showed that the prices of agricultural produce were much lower than that of neighboring Bengal. Another interesting fact which he highlighted was the higher wage rate in princely Tripura compared to neighboring Bengal. The dominance of Jhum cultivation and the concern of the British political agents of its pitfalls were also discussed by him. A very interesting feature of the revenue administration during the time of Birchandra Manikya, noted by him, was the farming system, quote unquote, farming system, practiced in the plains areas within the state. He says, and I quote, the collection of revenue from all the sources except the family taxes were collected in the hills from the tribal families, was in the hands of farmers. Normally, the farms were given to the highest bidders, but often the nobility, that is the Thakurs, or other favorites of the Raja were granted farms on very low terms, that is very low rental. There was no prohibition on subletting the farms. This is very interesting. No prohibition on subletting of the farms. The subletting of farms created a hierarchy of peasants and led to the emergence of sub-infeudation and thereby creating a feudal landlord class, I may say, although he did not use the word feudal in his work. He also highlighted the fact that in Birchandra's time, a novelty was introduced whereby revenue due for the next year was often collected in advance. It resulted in overtaxation of the peasants by the farmers and was one of the reasons of drain of wealth from the state of Tripura as the excess amount was transferred out. Another cause of drain of wealth noted by him was the fact that the Bengalis of the neighboring districts controlled trade and commerce of Hill Tripura, and such drain resulted in lack of capital accumulation in princely Tripura. So you can see that even when Professor Chaudhuri discusses the economic condition of princely Tripura, he actually takes the help of conceptual tools that have evolved in the Indian economic history, like drain of wealth or sub-infeudation and all these issues. And these are very important, that the history of Tripura is not something which can be studied in a watertight compartment. It has to be related with the overall development of historical forces and experiences in the rest of India, and since it was a colonial times, in the rest of the world as well. Professor Chaudhuri was instrumental, I must say, in delineating the contours of Rayati and Jhum cultivation practiced inside the state. These two types of economy developed side by side, one in the plains and other in the hills. One, where there was pronounced influence of the permanent settlement of Bengal, farming of lands, sub-infeudation, asking for higher rents from the peasants. So these are actually very much connected and had connections with what was happening in Bengal, being dominated by the Bengalis, and the other that followed age-old jhum cultivation in the hills, dominated by the tribes. He demarcated two types of revenue collecting mechanism. He thus did not lose sight of the specificities of a local economy within the broader framework of the colonial economy. That was exactly what I was telling earlier. Whether the economy of Prince Tripura was feudal, or was it a mixture of feudal and tributary modes of production? That is, feudal in the plains and tributary in the hills are some of the questions which require further elaboration. No work has not been properly done on these issues, and how how the princely state could manage both the feudal types of feudal mode of revenue extraction from the plains areas of the hill tributary. Remember, when I am talking about the plains areas, it is basically the plains areas on the borders of the hill Tripura. That is included within the hill Tripura. I am not talking about the British district of Tripura, which was totally under the permanent settlement. So that was part of Bengal, and there the king of Tripura was the Zamindar under the permanent settlement. So here I am talking about those plains areas, or what Professor Chaudhuri was talking was the plains areas within the district, within the state of Hill Tripura. There are plains areas as well. So what type of agriculture revenue administration was functioning in those areas? He was basically talking about that. There is much scope to develop further a theoretical understanding of the economy of tribal state formation in general and princely Tripura in particular in the days of the high noon of colonialism. He has laid the foundation, but the duty is of others to carry it forward. I know you have been listening for long, so I'm virtually coming to an end. While we may continue to debate on these issues and either accept him or debunk his interpretations, on one respect, Professor Chaudhuri had done such an immense service to the academia that his name will always be remembered and cited in any present or future historical work on the late 19th century Tripura. It was because of his hard labor that present-day historians of Tripura are so comfortably sitting in their study rooms and using most valuable primary sources for the study of this period, and that is the annual administrative reports of the political agency of Hill Tripura 1872 to 1889-90, which he published in 2 volumes after collecting them from different archives in the course of doing his PhD work. Credit goes to him for systematically and chronologically arranging and analyzing them. Consequently, and I am virtually coming to the end of my talk, consequently, he has sometimes been criticized for being too dependent on official records. But I think we may only listen to his words to dispel such notions about him and to understand his whole approach to the philosophy of history, a subject of which he was such a great admirer. He used to teach philosophy of history to his students in Tripura University, and he was much loved for that. A subject of which he was such a great admirer and teacher during his teaching days, and then I know his old students will vouch for that. You will also see why I called him a follower of E.H. Carr at the beginning of my lecture. I thus conclude my lecture with his own words and again offer my pranama to this great soul. Please listen to what he has said about his, and this gives us an idea of his philosophy and approach to history. And I quote him: "True, These are all British official records. Just talking about the administrative records. And there is a notion that official records reveal nothing but the official version. To a certain extent, this is valid for records, but we must remember that records in themselves do not constitute history. They, in fact, do not speak unless someone calls on them. How they would speak would ultimately depend on the person or the historian who calls on them. This was his philosophy of history. This was his methodology of history, based on facts, but it is the historian who has to make the facts answerable to the questions that are asked by the historian. With these, I conclude my lecture and I offer my sincerest thanks to the authorities of the Holy Cross College, particularly its Honorable Principal, Dr. Father Benny K. John, my colleagues and students also at one point of time, Dr. Nirmallo Kormokar, Mr. Devashish Dotto. I am thankful to all the participants who have listened to my lecture for such a long period of time. I know maybe it has ultimately become a little bit unbearable, but that you have listened to me. I am really thankful to you. I am thankful to all the participants, all the technical team who had made this possible. And I wish this tradition of Professor Dipak Kumar Chaudhuri Memorial Lecture, it continues in the days to come. I wish all my best wishes to all of you and to the Holy Cross College. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for speaking on such a wonderful and insightful topic. We all were mesmerized throughout your lecture. It was extremely informative and I can say enriching related to the past history of Tripura. It's a wonderful learning experience for all of us, sir. And it is my firm belief that our participants will definitely add their knowledge and understanding of the history of Tripura. We do expect this lecture will immensely help our students, academicians, and especially the research scholars who are planning to do their research in developing a better understanding of the life and works of Professor Chaudhuri, and also to revisit the different unrevealed historical narratives of the past of Tripura in the upcoming years. Thank you, sir, for your excellent presentation today. Thank you, sir. And we'll definitely look forward in the next year also to continue to roll on this memorial lecture, sir. Thank you, sir. Now, sir, I can ask our respected and esteemed participants to ask their queries or any questions, if any. I guess one question is already there. The question is to Monisankar sir, asked by Mr. Siddiq Mia. He wants to know that is British directly collect the revenue from Tripura or with the help of others?
Okay. Well, thanks for asking the question. Now, as you know that princely Tripura was at least independent in theoretical terms. From princely Tripura, the British did not collect the revenue directly. The revenue was collected by the Raja and his own officials. Whereas in the neighboring district of Tripura, which was under British administration and of which the Raja was only a zamindar under the permanent settlement, there Raja, as appointed as a zamindar by the British government, collected revenue from his peasants, and then he delivered a certain. You all know that under permanent settlement, it was the 9/10 of the rental that has to be delivered. That was fixed in 1793. So in independent Tripura or Hill Tripura, the British did not interfere, whereas the neighboring district of Plains Tripura or Chakla Roshanabad, in that area, the Raja was only a zamindar under the British government, and what he collected the revenue on behalf of the British government. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Hope Siddiq is happy with this answer. Now, moving on to the next question, sir. It has been asked by Mrs. Astamika Sinha. She's working currently in Tripura University as a guest faculty. She said, after studying Professor Dipak Kumar Chaudhuri, then in which category or school Professor Chaudhuri falls or see himself?
Okay, thank you, Ostomika. I know why you have asked these questions. You are now bothered about all the schools of historiography. Now, is it always necessary to clump together historians? So is it always necessary to call historians by names, by groups? But even then, since you have asked, and the amount of discussions I had with him on various issues and other things, I can say that he was more like a left liberal historian. He was more like left liberal historian of the type of, say, Professor Bipan Chandra. You can call him, but that is a very rough estimation. It's very difficult to call someone like Professor Dipak Chaudhuri who has not overtly joined any camp or any other things. Okay, so it is very difficult to say in that way, but he was more like a left liberal. There is no doubt there is in his work. We also see, although it is not very apparent, but there is a slight influence of the Marxist ideas in his writings when he uses such terms as drain of wealth and over execution from the peasants and other things, these issues, then we see a little bit of the influence of the Marxist historians on him, and that's why I have said left, but he was more a liberal historian. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I guess so many questions are there. Hope, sir, you will bear with it.
I'll try to answer whatever I know, because
Sure,
not
sir.
many things I don't know also.
Sure,
Participants
sir.
also, they know so many things. They can enlighten me also.
I guess they are very much excited, and the way they are commenting in the chat box, it clearly shows that they really enjoyed your lecture. Now, the next question is from Rajiv Dash. Though I asked them to be very specific, but he asked that. Thank you, sir, for presenting the lecture. He has said that, sir, as you have mentioned, he has worked on 19th and 20th century administration, economy of Tripura, etc. Sir, we get very rare material on position of women in Tripura in the same period. Sir, I want to know, does Professor Dipak Kumar Chaudhuri particularly worked on condition of women?
Okay, thank you, Rajiv, for asking. No, he has not worked on the women of late 19th century. As we have already said, that there are very less sources. But remember that women were always a silent member, or you can say always remained silent in historical sources. It is not only in Tripura but everywhere. So you have to read between the lines. Obviously, for Professor Dipak Kumar Chaudhuri, he had different other areas of concern. He was not specifically, you can say, he was not dealing with the women's issues or women's question or women's matters in the late 19th century. But if someone is interested, there are sources from the Rajmala itself. You have to read between the lines. There will not be very specifically matters related with women, but you have to read between the lines. You have to discuss the policies of the princely Tripura. You have to read some of the memoirs of that period, which are now published actually, from which you can get some idea about at least the royal or the condition of the women in the royal household. So in that way you can reconstruct, but it will be quite difficult, and it will require a lot of reading and a lot of patience. But as I've said, the Professor Dipak Chaudhuri was not overtly connected, or he discussed any women's question in the late 19th or early 20th century. Thank you. Okay, Nirmalo, can you hear?
Sorry, sir. Am I audible now?
Yeah, now
The
you're audible.
next, sorry, sir. I just forgot to switch on the mic. The next question is from Shushmita Banerjee. She has asked, sir, would you please elaborate about the feudal plains and tributary hills in case of revenue system?
This is exactly what I have said, that I have only thrown some ideas. I have thrown some ideas as I was reading through Professor Chaudhuri's works. I have thrown some ideas on the tributary mode and the feudal mode. Tributary mode, basically, what we see is that in a tributary mode, the subjects. Remember, in a tributary mode, there are subjects. The subjects may be peasants, maybe workers or whatever, and they pay tribute directly, and or it is collected by their chiefs or whatever, and it is given. Whereas in the feudal mode, you shift from the subjecthood to, say, peasants. They are peasants with certain rights. They are peasants with certain rights. So it is a well recognized an administrative system. A structure is there. A revenue structure collecting mechanism is there, through which it is collected, and the laws of the land directly apply to them, and the peasants and the kings, they are integrally connected. Whereas in a tributary mode, what we see, it is a prior mode to feudal, you can say, historically, where we say that those who paid the tribute, the community which pays the tribute, it is left otherwise independent to deal with its own matters, internal matters. So the tribes, they have their own internal administration, laws and customs and tradition which they follow. It is only say of a particular time in a year or twice in a year that this group pays tribute to their overlord, to the king, and then the king leaves them on their own. So there is a difference between a tributary mode and a feudal mode. So these modes, it is up to you. You're the emerging historians of Tripura, so it's up to you to develop. I have only thrown some ideas. Professor Dipak Chaudhuri neither used feudal mode, neither talked about tributary mode. This is what I have said, that by reading these, we may get a sense of these two types of modes functioning in princely Tripura at the same time, side by side. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sir, if you allow, we can take more 3 questions. Very specific.
Okay, only 3 more questions.
3 more questions, yes, sir. Because they are very much excited, sir.
Okay. And thankful. Okay. I'm thankful to all of them that at least they are so interested, and they're such an intelligent people. The questions that I'm receiving, they're such intelligent, and that speaks that they themselves are reading. So I have to be careful. I have to be careful in front of them.
Okay. So the next question is from Achia Begum. Okay. What was the actual area of Tripura in ancient India, especially in the princely state of Tripura?
Okay. The very concept of area of a particular state is a modern invention. Nowadays, we talk about the areas of a country, of a state. But when you talk of in the kingdoms of the pre-modern period, we do not talk of areas. Areas keep on fluctuating. Sometimes through annexations to wars, newer areas are brought. Sometimes you lose areas. Your kingdom becomes smaller. So whether you talk of so-called ancient times or medieval period, is pre-modern times, the question of area did not simply matter. Area mattered as long as the king could hold on to that area. There was no sacrosancy of that area. Now we all know that what is happening between China and India, because the area, the line, the demarcation, these are very sacrosanct nowadays. These are part of the nation state structure, and these are absent in the pre-modern days. So you will see that in pre-modern times, it is only after the coming of the British that the areas of the hill Tripura were clearly demarcated. And I have talked about that in the late 19th century, eastern boundaries of the state were always fluctuating. It was a fuzzy boundary. People moved in and out. People came in, they went out. There were border clashes. And therefore, the British had to fix that area. And that's why we see that there were boundary disputes which were fixed. So it is a new invention, it is a new thing which comes with the emergence, which comes with modernity and with the emergence of the nation state. In the pre-modern period, in the pre-nation state period, areas simply did not matter. Areas matter. If you annex, you get new areas, you lose areas. It is as simple as that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Last two, sir. The next question is from one of our students of Department of History, Holy Cross College, Debjani Bordhan Roy. Now, Debjani wants to know, sir, other than the economy and the administration, what were the other important parts of the society's structure did Professor Chaudhuri work on?
A very good question. Thank you, Debjani. When you look at his work, there are a few chapters where he has talked about the social structure of the tribes. How not only it is the princely administration or the economy, but the social structure of the tribes he has taught. And in fact, another, I have not talked about that in my lecture, but he has also discussed in some articles. For example, he has talked about when Tagore renounced his knighthood. He has written an article on the renunciation of Tagore's knighthood and the administrative dilemma. So there are different areas where he has worked on. Or for example, he has worked on the question or the movement of the abolition of, you can say, headship among the Lushais, Lushai movement in the 1940s in Tripura. So there are different areas in which actually what I said, Prof Dipak Chaudhuri has worked. So, but his main focus was on princely Tripura of the late 19th century, of the period of the Bir Chandra Maniko. And as I've said, that his main focus was on administrative history and the economy. But at the same time, when he dealt with economy, there was also an elaborate discussion of the social institutions, of the social structure of the tribes, and the relation between because social structure does not stand alone, irrespective of the political structure or economic structure. These are all combined whole. And he has discussed those issues. Thank you.
So the next question is from
Samrat
Chaudhuri. Is a very sir, one more is there, though he is very known to us, Soumitra, but I don't think if we allow that, we will stop with Sir Soumitra. Now the next question is from Samrat Chaudhuri. He's a good friend of mine and working as a leading journalist of Tripura. Samrat wants to know, is there any idea that which type of penal code which was enforced in the princely Tripura?
Yeah, obviously the princely Tripura has its own penal code, but that evolved over a period of time. Not much in the time of Bir Chandra Maniko, but over a period of time in the 20th century, there evolved a penal code. But you have to remember that inside Tripura, it is the wish and the whims of the king, which was paramount. So it has to be accepted. So, for example, we know what happened during the Riyang uprising of the early 1940s. So it was the king's authority, king's commands, which determined what punishment and other judgments were to be issued. So it was not likely the British penal codes and other penal codes and other things. It is the king's directive, it is the king's desire which mattered. But at the same time, I must say that throughout the 20th century, first half of the 20th century, there were attempts to introduce some sort of you can say legal apparatus in the state of Tripura. So from the late 19th and early 20th century. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We are heading towards the last question of the day. I'm really sorry and apologize for not taking the others' questions due to the shortage of time. We have to finish it within the stipulated period. Now, the Soumitra Debbarma, again our very own colleague in the Department of History, is working as a guest faculty now. What was the social structure of the state during the time of princely state? Was there any work done on the which highlights the caste and communal status of the state during the princely rule?
At the moment, there is no work on the social structure of princely Tripura in the late 19th century. So it is up to the historians to work on those areas. The future historians to work on those areas on the social structure. But obviously, there are even Professor Dipak Kumar Chaudhuri. He has talked about the social structure a little bit, but this has to be elaborated, or he may be criticized also, he may be critiqued also. So it is up to the future historians to discuss that how, on the one hand, you have the caste-based Bengali society or the other societies, the non-tribes, and then the tribe society. At the same time, you have to remember that during Birchandra's Manikko's time, there was a caste movement as well. There was a caste movement that was taking shape, if I'm not mistaken, in the 1880s. There was a caste movement when Birchandra Manikko initiated a movement to uplift some of the tribes and to bring them within the caste fold of Hindu society. So you can see there is a tribal society, and remember, here also I'm using the word tribal society, but this term tribe, it is again an anthropological invention of the British. It is again an anthropological invention of the British. So there are many issues on which it can be worked upon, because the Europeans, the British, they may call them the tribes, but the kingly family, the princely family of Tripura never considered it in that way. So there is a dichotomy of interpretations. So on which that there can be a lot of work actually that can be done. Thank you. I think that I have done with a lot of questions.
Yes, sir. So thank you so much again for answering and the queries of our participants. I hope each and everyone will be highly beneficial and satisfactory answers were given.
I don't know, but I have tried my best. Thank you. Thank you.
Sir, we have to stop here. Otherwise, it will be an unending process the whole day. History is unending, I can say, sir.
Yeah.
So thank you so much again, sir, for bearing this difficulties despite your busy schedule. Thank you, sir. Now, it is my immense pleasure to invite our Honorable Dean, Academic Dean, IQAC Coordinator, Dr. Pankaj Chakravarti,